One of the aspects, and Sai Deepak, if I can come across to you, and then I'll bring in Sriram Sheshadri, Ratanji, and also Professor Dinesh Vashni. The aspect is the management of these temples was taken over by the state because of gross mismanagement. That is one of the arguments that is given. To protect the interests, the core interests of the majority, that's the reason why these institutions were taken on board, because there was gross mismanagement, negligence, etc. And there were a handful few who had the control, who rather than propagating their dharma or their traditions, were filling up their own pockets, and this was the argument that was being given, that's been given. How do you look at it?
So there are two aspects which are typically presented as arguments to justify the state control of temples. So let me deal with both arguments. First is with respect to mismanagement of the financial resources of the temple and the landed assets of the temple. The second is the fear that perhaps certain communities would dominate access to temples itself and bring back untouchability is the fear that is typically mongered whenever you discuss the issue of state control of temples. So therefore, let me start with the most sensitive aspect. Any person who is decently lettered and who can Google can take a look at Article 25(2)(b) of the Constitution, which clearly says that untouchability has been abolished and access to public spaces under Article 17. Article 17 says that untouchability has been abolished, and Article 25(2)(b) says that entry of previously untouchable classes into temples cannot be prohibited by any person citing anything. This is the law. Therefore, if state was to vacate the temple and if it were to go back to the communities, no person who takes the temple back in terms of its ownership, or no community that takes it back, can bring back untouchability. So this fear mongering that goes on constantly saying that casteism will be back, casteism will be back, is meant to be a stick to constantly hurt the Hindu community. Therefore, this fear has no basis. So let's come to the second question. The second question is with respect to management of assets and corruption. Here is the most important thing. 90% of control of temples by the state is without any order that is passed that records any instance of corruption. So in the state of Tamil Nadu, where close to about 85 to 90% of the temples are under the control of the state, you ask them for the order that was passed to basically show these are the instances of corruption which have necessitated the control of this particular temple by the state. They don't even have those administrative orders because the law requires that before the state steps into a religious institution and takes it over, because it's fundamentally a non-state institution, it needs to give its reasons for stepping into that particular institution and for taking over its control. So first of all, you won't find orders in 90% of the cases. Second, even if this were to be the case, the state under the constitution has a constitutional obligation to vacate the place after the setting the house in order, which means it is meant to be a temporary tenant. It cannot sit there for eternity. Unfortunately, the state is such a litigious tenant which never vacates. And despite repeated petitions before the court, they never vacate. So according to me, state institutions and state governments have behaved in the most shameless of manners when it comes to Hindu institutions. The third most important aspect is the question of equality. Any number of news reports across the country, both mainstream, English and vernacular, will tell you the number of instances of malfeasance with respect to other institutions or other institutions of worship of other faiths. However, the state, no state government, regardless of its dispensation or political ideology or whatever it may be, has shown the guts to exercise the very same powers in instances of corruption with respect to institutions of other communities. Therefore, inequality, violation of Articles 14, 25 and 26 is writ large on the face of it across at least 15 states of this country. I'll make the last point and I'll leave it at that. Every temple and every religious institution is run typically under the Trusts Act of 1882. And therefore, there is an audit mechanism to ensure that there is no corruption and there is no mismanagement of resources. So when there is already a Trusts Act which ensures that you conduct the affairs of the institution in a proper fashion, and there are powers or let's say specific corrective mechanisms that are already provided in these acts, why do you need the super legislation ultimately, which is over and above these trust legislations, where you sit over these institutions like a big brother? Finally, the central government under the concurrent list entry 28 has the power to pass a uniform code, at least with respect to religious institutions, so that the treatment of institutions is equal across the board, regardless of the faith. Therefore, as opposed to constantly forcing the Hindu community to go before the court to ask for equality, the central government is in a position to put an end to this matter without having to go to court.
Correct. So then why don't they do it? And if they do, they need a court order to be able to do it with 303 seats in parliament to say, and you know, coming on a platform, which a political platform where they said that they have championing the cause of Hindus and the cultural revival in this country. It just beats me that it has not yet been done, and there is so much of a deterrence. So where is the problem? Because in 19 states in this country, the BJP, or say now 17 states, the BJP holds sway and influence, and they are also sitting on control with temple boards and institutions. Jai Sai Deepak.
For Article 370, there was no need for a court order. For the CAA, there was no need for a court order. Point number 3. In several states where the BJP was not in power previously, in their manifestos, they specifically said that we will free temples from state control. Unfortunately, no action has been taken in that particular direction after they've come to power. In fact, they've gone the opposite direction. Uttarakhand and certain instances in Karnataka being cases in point. Yeah. Uttarakhand being perhaps the most glaring example. Therefore, this is not a political issue. Across the board, I'm sorry to use the word hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is rife when it comes to state control of Hindu institutions.
No, and state control of Hindu institutions, and also